And in honor of Black History Month, and really excited to bring this program to all of you and all of you watching and those that will be watching at a later time. We welcome you to the conversation as well. And we really honor that in unity we start everything with prayer. So I want to invite you to join me first of all for a moment of prayer. And we just say thank you, God. Thank you for the opportunity to come together, to have this conversation, to open ourselves to realizations and understandings that expand us and unify us in this world. And we know that your divine presence is alive in each and every one of us. And we are grateful for the power and that guidance that is moving us in this time, in this conversation, and in every conversation, that we may be a vessel for your light and love in this world in a more powerful way. And we say, yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so it is. Amen. And yes. And I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Ruffaner. As you know, he's our administrator here, but he also brings with him many, many gifts of loving to both bring public speaking and gifts as a Toastmaster and having won awards in that arena, as well as then him being a fabulous moderator here tonight for our program. And we're so excited. So help me welcome Ryan Ruffaner.
Thank y'all. For the spotlight tonight are our guests here, whom I will introduce. First we have Reverend Sheila Gautreaux. She is an adjunct staff minister at the Unity of Houston, born in Harlem, New York City, raised in New Orleans, educated in segregated public schools, which many of us cannot even fathom what that would be like. She marched in the civil rights movement in Atlanta with Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy, who went to jail twice. One of a handful of African-American flight attendants with United Airlines. The first African-American intern with the New Orleans Opera, and you made your debut as, Fresquita, yes. In Carmen, with Shirley Rent as Carmen, and you were the first African-American hired by the company in a leading role. You were trained in New York and Italy, performed with opera companies and symphonies in the United States and Italy. You are an ordained Unity minister and licensed Unity teacher, the author of 3 books, including Praying Through a Storm. Next we have Helen Rao. Next we have Helen Rao, who grew up in rural San Joaquin Valley, went to school at the University of California, Berkeley, went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin and Florida, where you studied biochemistry. You have worked at the Texas Medical Center and NASA from high school, and throughout your university education, you were also involved in human rights through the church. Please welcome Helen Rao. Next, we have Renee Bourgeois, a mechanical engineer with over 20 years experience as a technical leader in chemical, high-tech, and oil and gas industries. She's a technology translator who takes technical organizations and turns them into data powerhouses. Through sustainable digital transformation, she makes the impossible possible. She's been to France, Switzerland, Italy, Dubai, and Iraq. She's a world traveler, but these days she prefers to stay stateside, living large in League City with her son Nicholas, her dog Lola, and maintaining her status of the best aunt ever. She is also a life learner who is always curious, enjoys books, knitting, cooking, and classical music. She was always up to something and ready for an adventure. Please welcome Renee Bourgeois.
Yay!
I think the question, one of the biggest questions on everybody's mind, when we mention Dr. King, for most of us, Dr. King is a memory whom we can explore through documentaries and watching old clips. But 2 of you have actually marched with Dr. King. What was that like?
Would you hand her the mic? And you need to touch the bottom so it turns on. Yes?
Yeah.
Testing. It was awe-inspiring. I mean, he was who he appeared to be. He's a very powerful person. But there was a deep commitment, and you could feel that commitment coming from him. I had an opportunity to be a little closer to him a couple of times because my cousin Howard Creasy, who had the Baptist church across the street from Morehouse College, I was at Spelman College, and when they would be planning marches and other kinds of activities where they wanted the students from the whole Atlanta space to come, they would have it at my cousin's church, and he would invite me to come over to help his wife's younger sister to babysit the kids. And so I got to actually babysit the King children, the Abernathy children, of course, the Creasy children, and a few other children of some of the civil rights leaders. And I have to say that they were normal kids. And it was amazing to see this man both in a natural beingness of father and friend to my cousin and so forth, and husband and so forth, but also then to see him when he was transforming himself into that leadership capacity. And it was as if he stepped from that human realm into almost a mystical, it was powerful to see. Something overtook him where you knew that he was in a very close relationship with God, and that everything he was speaking and everything he was wanting to have happen and to bring forth and to connect people to was coming through him, not from him. And so he was so real. And that was what he came here to do. It was obvious as I learned more about purpose and so forth. At the time, I didn't really know it, but I knew it was something powerful. But now that I've learned so much about beingness and so forth, I know now that he was stepping into his purpose whenever he would get up to speak or to galvanize everyone to be a part.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Wow. Yeah, well, my story is really different from hers. I was a student. I was a sophomore in college, and I had been involved in some of the civil rights, but not with Martin Luther King. But I went with the Methodist Church. These days you would call it internship, but we just called it community work, or helping the community. And they assigned me, the Methodist Church assigned me to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I came, as I was pointed out, San Joaquin Valley, a rural area, and here I was in this northern big city. And I lived with, I was called a commune. It was a church-run house where we had a minister, and we had students in there. We went out and had assignments within the community. It was community organizing. Anyway, my roommate was, I was thinking of Michelle Obama, because she sort of looked like Michelle Obama, so I think she was even prettier than Michelle Obama. But her father was African American and her mother was white. And so she came out this beautiful person. Anyway, she invited me after the internship was over to go with her to Chicago. And we stayed with her uncle, who lived in housing that was meant for people that didn't have a lot of money. And he was a porter for the railroads. And so they went to this Methodist church on the west side, near west side. He lived in the south side of Chicago, but they lived in the west side. The church was in the Methodist church. And they were getting ready to go on a march. So I was sort of ended up in a situation. And it was really fun because they were trying to get organized so that, they had the food and they had the singing and all the good things. And I was told what to wear. You had to dress up, and this was a really hot day in the summer in Chicago. The city was ready to blow. the country was ready to blow. There was so much racial tension. In fact, there was so much racial tension, the mayor left town.
Wow.
He didn't want to have anything to do with this. And everybody in this church, the women dressed up, they wore stockings and high heels and hats and gloves, because those days that's what you wore. Because I didn't have hats and gloves, but I had the rest of it. And so they gave me a card, and on one side I put my personal name and information. On the other side was a phone number in case I got arrested that I was supposed to call. So, I was game, so I went with this group, and all the way to this here King, we marched down this main street of Chicago. People were singing, and it wasn't just "We Shall Overcome," although that was sung quite a few times. It was the spirituals, it was religious songs, and it was really neat to be around people that really knew all this music. I really enjoyed myself, and I was sort of proud of the fact that I knew some of the words. Anyway, we got to where King was, and it was the back of a big truck, like the platform was semi. And fortunately, they had amplification, and there were thousands of people there, but somehow this church had managed to get pretty close to the truck, so he wasn't that far away. Anyway, Jesse Jackson, there were things going on when we got there, but Jesse Jackson started it all out, and as you would expect, was really massive preaching and loud and amens and all this stuff going on, but recognizing that the city was ready to explode. And many cities, that was the year of Watts, many cities did explode that summer. And it was hot, and it was humid, and we were all dressed up. So then Martin Luther King comes on, and of course the people that worked closely with King called him Martin. They weren't so formal with him. But anyway, he comes on, and I'm so glad they had amplification, because unlike your experience, he really calmed the crowd down. It was a prayer, and he spoke in this very soft voice. And of course, he is a minister, so he talked about what the Gospels teach us, what the Bible teaches us about loving your enemies. And this was, I began to understand, I was just telling Ryan, I'm beginning to understand what really peaceful demonstrations were all about. So he took an incredible, tense situation and brought people to loving one another.
Wow.
It was very powerful. I was in tears. I just couldn't believe it. And I thought a lot about that. And I think in terms of leadership style, what he showed me was that, in my leadership style, we're in position A, we want to get to B, and so we figured out the strategy to get to B. That's not what he was talking about. He was there to promote fair housing, and I mentioned to Ryan, we have a lot of structural issues to this day that are anti-fair housing. But he was there to protest housing because Chicago was terrible when it came to housing and segregation. Anyway, he brought people back to this love, and it wasn't this A to B, and that's sort of what you were talking about. It wasn't A to B. What it was another plane. And if you read, some of his speeches or hear some of his speeches on television, you hear that in his speeches. So it was on a different platform. And I've often thought that great leadership wasn't getting us from A to B, but was getting us in a whole nother platform of life. And that's where he took us, that hot afternoon in Chicago. And Chicago did not have riots, even though a lot of people wanted them. They did not have riots, and they were not instigated. And so there were people that were arrested, but it was just so powerful. And as I said, I cried because I never had thought of something in a whole different realm than where the rest of us are. So that was my experience.
Wow.
Renee, well, even though you didn't march with Dr. King, to everyone up here that there are a lot of racial tension still, division still, discrimination still. What role do you think Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach, what can we learn from that today? How can we better apply that today?
Well, that's $1 million question. I mean, Dr. King's message was about accepting each other as we show up in whatever skin we showed up. Didn't matter if you're male, female, black, white, brown. We're supposed to love and accept each other. We should communicate. He was all about unity. And today, it's not as, his message is more important today than ever. because it's not so overt, the racism. It's more what I call bias. People have biases based on your appearance, based on how you show up. And I think we need to think back to his words that, you know, it just really doesn't matter. And that's the greatest concern to me, because we have biases. I call them unconscious and conscious biases. That's better? All right. So, you know, you have conscious and unconscious biases. And, you know, of course, the unconscious ones are the ones you don't know about. And I think what we need to do is have dialogue with people and not be ashamed that if someone brings a bias to your attention with great love, you learn from that. It's not meant to put you down or make you feel bad. It's like, hey, you know, you said this, and that affects me this way. So I'll give you an example. Do you mind? Okay. Give you an example that happened a few months ago. A few months ago, I was on crutches. And so I was at the mercy of my son driving me around, and we decided to take a trip to Costco. And of course, being a kid, he wants to park as far away as possible. And I'm like, I'm on crutches, I'm gonna need the motorized cart, can we park closer? So he parks, I'm like, look, there's a parking space over there. And as we're driving around, I noticed a woman looking at us. And I thought, she's just looking at us. We get out the car, I'm hobbling on crutches, and my son, being, you know, a guy, he has my purse and he's swinging it around. And he's doing this number and he's walking, and I'm just like, really? You're doing this? I'm glad it's all zipped up. And, you know, he was like, da 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 da. We get to the entrance of Costco, and the greeter is coming out, and she's shaking her head and she's chuckling. And she goes, do you need a card? I'm like, yeah, good thing my purse is still here, you know, he's looking around. And she said, well, there was a lady that was very concerned about you. She was concerned about your safety. She thought you were in danger. I said, from what? And she's like, you know, she saw you walking up here, and she said, I saw them drive around the parking lot. True. We got out, and she just said, I just feel like that woman's in danger. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I told her she's not in danger, they're together. And she's like, I didn't say this, but they also look alike. So I knew you guys were related. And she wouldn't let it go. She's like, well, I think he's about to hurt her. I think she's really in danger. He said, hey, he has on a hoodie. And she laughed. She goes, that's what kids wear now, is a hoodie. Yeah, it's like 100 degrees outside. She goes, my daughter sleeps in a hoodie. You know, what can you do about it? That's what kids do. And so she's just laughing, and this happens pretty quickly, and I'm just shaking. We're both shaking our heads. So I learned Costco has their greeters training to look at their parking lots. But it kind of stunned me, because I thought, this could have went very bad. Yeah. What if that person just took her at face value, called the police? Here I am in Costco on my little motorized cart, and the police are coming to arrest my son. To me, that was an unconscious bias. And even though it was brought to her attention, her story started shifting to validate what she thought she saw. Because I'm like, who robs somebody and goes into Costco? That would be a first, take me to Costco. So, I mean, we can laugh about it, but those are the lessons, you know, that we need to learn. And, you know, it was gently brought to her attention, but she just wouldn't let it go. And that's kind of one of the sad things in the world, is that, you know, you assume somebody looks a certain way or is wearing something that they're up to no good. So the lessons of Dr. King, like I said, are even more important. That, you know, you just can't take someone. You got to what really did you notice? Because she didn't hear the conversation, me telling him to stop swinging my purse around. And, you know, she just assumed, and that assumption just takes you to another space.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I had a friend, his name was Bernard Harris. He was an astronaut, and he had flown, I think, on 3 or 4 missions as an astronaut. And he was also a physician, graduated from Texas Tech Medical School, and graduated, his undergraduate was at U of H. Anyway, I was talking to him in the parking lot at NASA one time, and I said, I said, oh, I'm so embarrassed. And she said, why? And I said, well, I was working in the yard and it was filthy dirty, but I wanted to run to the grocery store. So being filthy dirty, I ran to the grocery store and I said, it's really not a good idea to go to the grocery store so dirty. And he looked at me, he said, he was African American. He said, I would never go to the grocery store dirty.
Wow.
And, I realized that he had to go take a shower and get cleaned up before he would go to the grocery store because of the biases that you're talking about. So I just wanted to add that was a very successful man who had the same experiences that you were having, and he just knew better.
May I just add something?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I had to teach my son at a certain age, and he was starting to drive. I had to teach him what to do if he was stopped by a policeman. Don't move quickly. Keep your hands where they can see it. Yes, sir, no, sir. Don't move really quickly. And he had the experience the day of his prom, his senior prom. And we went and rented I don't remember, was a Lincoln Continental or whatever it was at the time. And he and his best friend, and they were going to pick up tuxedos and corsages for their dates and so forth, and they got stopped. And my husband was behind them at the time, but the policeman got to them first, and my son remembered everything that he had been told. And they wanted to know, what are you doing in that car, and so forth. And he explained very calmly to the policeman, and that he and his friend were going to prom and so forth and so on. Well, then by that time, my husband had gotten up to the car. But that was something that we had to do as African Americans. We had to teach our children how not to get shot by police. And my beloved brothers and sisters, we're still having to do that. That has not changed. So there's something that's being called for, and so we have some work to do. That is still going on. So there's something being called for right now in this world, because young black males are still having to be very careful when it comes to being stopped by policemen, or they're dead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I got this. It's all good. It's all good. So I've been curious about that kind of conversation for a long time, because I've heard that it's a common occurrence for African Americans to have those conversations with their children. And you tell them what to do, hands on the wheel, all that kind of stuff. I imagine the question of why comes up a lot. Like, why do I have to do this? It's like, just to a child who isn't acclimated to this sort of thing, who doesn't understand it, how do you go about introducing them to that reality that they're a part of, that they don't know they're a part of yet, to that kind of like, hey, you might be treated this way if they've never experienced it before, but it could mean life or death. How do you like emotionally prepare them for that? Not just instructions, but like helping them understand that that's the way the country is.
It's a lot easier now because there's so many television shows and everything is instantly broadcast. It's not hard at all now. Mm-hmm. They're seeing it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so all you have to do is remind them, don't forget. And you tell them, you're going out, it's late at night with your friends, don't be acting crazy in the car, with your feet stuck out of the window, and don't have any beer or anything like that in the car. If a police car pulls up, slow down, stop, be respectful, don't make any wrong moves, put their hands where they can see them, and conduct yourself in an orderly and quiet manner. But they already know it. We remind them sometimes, but it's all on television now, and there's so many TV shows, am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that they are replicating it. So they know that they're an endangered species. And that's the way they look at it. They say, we're an endangered species. And that's why I keep saying there is so much being called for from us. And I'm sitting here looking at these powerful unity people. What can we do? That's the question that I would like to have people help. What can we do? We know the truth. What can we do?
Do you want to answer that? Sure. Go ahead. Okay. Well, actually, I'd like to change the conversation just a little bit. Since we're talking about Black History Month, we had a person that was a commander in the Marines, and his name was Charlie Bolden. And I got a chance to meet, I met several very, very fine people, African-American people, who have done great things in this country, and they're not in the textbooks, unlike Martin Luther King is. But one of them is, the other one I want to mention is, but they both, Charlie Bolden grew up in segregated schools, and the other person that I got a chance to meet while I was at NASA, I was sent to Harvard, the Kennedy School of Government, and there Thurman Marshall came to speak. And at that particular, and it gets to your point, at that particular talk, he gave a talk, and then they sort of had a drawing for the students that could come and meet with him in small groups. And my name came up. I was the least likely person to be there. But of course, you know, he was talking, Thurman Marshall was talking about how to inculcate in the law human rights. And he, you know, referenced the different cases in the Supreme Court and other places in the world. And he wanted the law it would be so inculcated in the law that there would not be all these issues. And he talked about how to get that accomplished. I have to tell you, probably 80% of that talk was over my head. I mean, this was a genius that was talking about this stuff, and I was not quite at the genius level, but this is a person that was truly repressed as a young person, and yet here he was, this genius. And then the other person that I actually spent time working with Thurman Marshall when I got to meet him, the other person was Charlie Bolden. As I said, he was the administrator for NASA, and he was the center director for Johnson Space Center. You talk about racism, he faced it hard. He went to segregated schools, but apparently there was a politician that decided Charlie wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and they did not take African Americans at the Naval Academy. So he was one of the first that went there. And of course he did well, and he got in the Marines, and he got all the way to general, and he got to be an astronaut, and he got to be a commander. So, I mean, he has a very, very accomplished life. He became the NASA administrator. I was thrilled about that because I got a chance to work closely with Charlie, and he was just an outstanding individual, outstanding astronaut. And, you know, we talked about race relations, and we talked about all these things that, you know, over beer, because what you did with astronauts, you went out with beer. So anyway, when he became the administrator of the Obama administration, the racist comments that came out of my colleagues at NASA, and finally the center director, who was also a retired Marine general, he had a big talk, and he said, it was all on the email stuff. He said, one of these comes to my attention, you are going to have your salary stopped.
Awesome.
It was really harsh because he didn't want to put up with all this racism. Charlie Bolden, the NASA administrator, he came down several times, and unlike our center director, he was full of love and compassion and acceptance, and sort of what you were talking about. He really knew how to behave and to really enamor people. We all just fell, I fell in love with him again, but everybody just sort of fell in love with him, and there was a kind of magic in that he showed. And I just think, I don't know how you go from being treated as a horrible, as a young person, to being such a great person as a retired general and NASA administrator, but somehow he made that transition and really well. And of course, Thurman Marshall made it as an intellectual scholar and as a Supreme Court justice. So I've gotten to meet two people that transcended all of that racism, horrible behavior, and somehow became really good people and examples for all of us.
Beautiful.
So I think you said, what do we need to do to change? Well, one, we need to have conversations. And, kind of like your last talk you had last month about media. The media kind of the world, and a lot of people don't realize that. And they go for the sensationalism. Now, if you see someone who's black, who's an engineer, who's raised their child, putting them through college, going about day to day, well, that's kind of boring. It's boring. And you don't, so instead of seeing people just going about doing their day-to-day lives and celebrating their accomplishments, like Charlie Baldwin, we get to see the worst of the worst. We see people killing, we see people on drugs, and so people automatically assume when they see a black person, well, this is how they are. There's that bias again. So what we need to do, and it's really horrible that we're just doing it in February, we need to talk about all the great things that, black men and women have accomplished. Like, for instance, VoIP was created by a black woman. And very few people know that. But, she's yet another hidden figures. And we need to get all these hidden figures out of the shadows and just recognize their accomplishments. They're not looking to be glorified or worshiped. But, just like you would say, who discovered Pluto? Who discovered, the internet? Who created the internet? It was actually another woman that created the internet. But, those type of things, when you talk about their accomplishments, that way you start shifting perception to something positive. As opposed to, oh, wow, there's yet another shooting. But, oh, my gosh, we have WhatsApp because of a woman. We have the internet because of a woman. They happen to be black, but you're celebrating them and you're normalizing accomplished people. And that's what we need to do. Well, no, it shouldn't be just a month. It just needs to be, all the time. Because, like you said, even though you see a lot of people are highlighting this because it's Black History Month, and you'll see in the comments, well, why you gotta highlight that? Well, because you need to know. It's just, it's great to know who created the Nerf gun, greatest toy of all time. Things like that. So we need to talk about those accomplishments all the time, especially this month.
Okay, that was the next question was, do you believe that Black History Month, or what should be done with Black History Month? Do you have any additional comments? I think you summed it up pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you guys?
I like what The View on television is doing. They are every day for the entire month. They mention some accomplishment of an African American, and even the people around the table will say, wow, I didn't know that. And so, there's some that I'm learning about, and I'm a big Black history buff, but I'm learning even more. There are some things that I had no idea were created or facilitated or accomplished by African Americans. So I believe that, like you said, if you hear more and more about who we really are, not maybe a few people who've done some bad things, but to hear the majority of people of this color are good people. And they're all trying to make it and trying to accomplish the same things that everybody else is attempting to accomplish. They're trying to put their kids through college. They're trying to maybe take a vacation every year. And they're working hard. They're going to jobs. Some jobs are white-collar jobs. Other ones are not. And some people are working very hard. But the majority of African Americans are trying to work for everything they acquire. And if we could just continue to find out more about the contributions they're making and that they want to live in a safe and healthy and sane environment just as much as everybody else. I think that we could, what is it, when you something reaches a certain percentage of knowledge about something, and it starts to be, the negative begins to be smaller. I think that's when we reach this quantum lift in consciousness that will then transport us into a greater appreciation of African Americans. Am I making any sense?
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that? And by the way, at any point, if you do have something to add, just raise your hand and we can turn it over to you. Okay.
Well, you may have noticed I'm not an African American. Just in case. From a white person's point of view, though, from somebody that was raised, and the reason I mentioned San Joaquin Valley and the rural, I mean, it was a very racist society that I grew up in, and I always laughed because my relatives were against everybody, including Catholics and Jews. I mean, it didn't matter. It's only Methodists and Baptists were the only people that counted. So we had a lot of Japanese and Chinese, so I grew up in a totally racist environment. So, you know, and I used to laugh about it with my mother. I said, if we listened to the relatives, we wouldn't like anybody. And then there was always the exception, you know, well, she's okay. But from a white person, I think, you know, and I mentioned this to Ryan, I think as white people, we are part of the society too, and as if we want to look at it as a total community and not just as African American and this and that and then all these different groups, but look at it as a total community. One of the things I have to think we have to do is structurally make some changes. So when we talk about the future and what we're going to do, and I want to mention, the fourth person I'm going to mention was Eleanor Tinsley, and I got a chance to meet her too. She was elected to the Houston Independent School Districts during the big civil rights uprising. And of course, Houston has segregated schools. They were clearly segregated. So she recognized that we needed to change all of that. So to get back to your point, she got elected to the school board, and she is now renowned for this, but she forced this integration of the Houston Independent School District. And so she was white, she wasn't African American, because there's no African American was going to be on the Houston Independent School Board, that's for sure. But she began to move it, and I think one of the things we have to do is continue to move the conversation and continue to recognize not just these biases, but actual true discrimination, because we have a lot of it. I think we need to recognize that, and I think we need to challenge it and try to find ways like Eleanor Tinsley did with her work with the school board to make the changes that hopefully will get us moving to this higher plane that Martin Luther King was talking about. So I think that's something, you know, we're getting ready to change some of the freeways in Houston, and some of that will just promote segregation. So I think there are things that we really need to think about, and the biases that we have in ourselves, and how to move those beyond continuing those biases and having a conversation that gets us to solving problems instead of sitting over here with our preconceived ideas. That's sort of my idea.
Awesome.
We have a question.
Okay, yeah,
From
go ahead.
Facebook Live, Raymond, can you read that last question?
What are some suggestions for me as a passionate advocate to make a difference and be more supportive? That's from Ellen Rogers.
Anyone?
I mean, you gotta have the conversation. I mean, you can't just pay it lip service that, you know, I'm gonna, you know, be a supporter. You gotta walk your talk and be willing to have those difficult conversations, and that's what we need to do to get to that higher plane. Because if we just keep ignoring it or, you know, not acting on it, it becomes worthless. I mean, we can sit here and just say, yay, you know, I'm gonna be an advocate, I'm gonna do what I can, but if you don't take action or have that conversation or speak up when you see something going on, then it's all for nothing.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. Speak up. Don't hesitate if you hear someone that you know say something. What is it? If you see something, say something. Yeah. Be willing to say, to take that risk and step out and say, not every African American is like that. You know, perhaps you might want to get to know some African Americans who do the same kinds of things you do, and so forth. And I have another one that you can give to everybody. Are you all ready for this?
Yep.
Scientists have proven that all of us, no matter what race we are, came from the same woman in Africa. They call her Lucy. All, and my brothers and sisters, all of our DNA comes from that woman. So truthfully, we're all black.
Well, that's actually true. We all carry the same DNA. We are not different species, which is, of course, when I was taught we were different species, but we're not different species. But she said, we're all the same in terms of our DNA. Now, we're mixtures, and we have different cultural heritage. And the only reason we have white people is some of those out of Africa moved to Northern Europe, and it wasn't an advantage. It was more of an advantage to have light skin because of vitamin D than it was to have dark skin.
And the Ice Age, too, remember?
And the Ice Age, right. So it's
Yeah, you just lost your melanin.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, yes. But standing up, I think that's something that's hard for me to do is stand up, but I certainly run across it a lot. And when those people were coming from New Orleans because of Katrina, remember that? They were coming in here. I heard so many bad comments. Fortunately, I was involved in a church that was taking a lot of those people in. It was a whole group of churches that were taking a lot of those people in. And I got a chance to meet. These poor people had lost their homes in New Orleans. I mean, had nothing except what they could haul over in their cars. And I was so impressed with them, and I've told everybody that story. And I hear these comments where all the bad people came from New Orleans. I mean, it's racist comments. And we do need to stand up to that and say, no, that's not the answer. The answer is that there are people that these people really needed our help at that time. And I think that, to get back to Black History Month, I guess I really support it because like you said, we learn so much. And you learn all the great people that have come before us. And of course, you mentioned music, the great music of the world. A lot of that came from Africa. So we have had that experience. Great dancing came from Africa. Great literature came from Africa. So we have this heritage in the world of this greatness that I think if we can take some time out in our days to celebrate, I think, even though it's specifically for one particular group of people, I think we need to celebrate it all the time. And so for me, this month is a really good educational opportunity for me.
But it's not really for one particular group of people. We're all black.
Yeah, that's right.
So why not all of us celebrate Black History Month? I'm just saying, we could start a new thing. So when there's Black History Month next year, say to your friends and relatives, I'm celebrating my month.
I love it.
Because the scientists have proven we're all related. So I'm just saying.
That's beautiful.
I have nothing to add.
Okay,
Back to me, and I'm like, okay.
I have two interrelated questions. One is, what do you think the source of racism is? And let's narrow it down. The source of racism in America, and how is that interrelated to Jim Crow and the effects of Jim Crow today?
What, Jim Crow?
Like the Jim Crow laws, like it used to be like voter literacy tests, but they were so complicated and confusing they were meant to, yeah.
Those are $2 million questions. The source of racism, who knows? it all comes down to differences. Somewhere, somehow, someone decided these people were different. You know, I mean, yeah, you're right. You could trace it back to slavery, but you know, there was racism before there was slavery, because with the Catholic Church, they had that doctrine that whatever land they conquered, the people they conquered, if they weren't Catholic or Christians, then they were thought of as less than, as subhuman. So that applied to anybody that wasn't Catholic. So, I mean, there could be your source of racism. They think, well, I'm better than you because, you know, there's more of us that can understand you, or who knows. But, you know, in America, you would say slavery. But that's hard to say, because there were Native Americans here before there were slaves.
Slaughtered.
So, I mean, I think that's one of the great questions, because when you think of it in that, you know, there were people of color here, indigenous people, and they didn't have racism. It was just until the advent of Europeans or the explorers coming here that you had racism.
Yeah.
So, as you know, Jim Crow, you still see that with how the districts are drawn.
They do, absolutely right.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How the
They're
districts-
redrawing the districts to favor, you know, certain constituents. You would think in this day and age we wouldn't have that. You still have people that, you know, they show up to vote and mysteriously they're disqualified because there's an inaccuracy on their voter registration record, or they don't have a valid ID. So, I mean, that is intimidating people not to show up to vote, because people just want to show up and vote and go. They don't have to stand there, you know, 15, 20 minutes trying to prove they are who they say they are, because, you know, their name is not on the voter roll, or there's an error in how their name appears on the voter roll. So, you know, Jim Crow still exists. We just call it gerrymandering. We call it a pretty name. It's gerrymandering, or, you know, redrawing district lines. So it still exists. And, you know, there are just laws in place, and that's where you can do something as a voter. Go out and vote. You know, pay attention to the issues and challenge, you know, your representatives, like, you know, why are these lines being redrawn? They're incorrect. Because, you know, in the grant, it hurts everybody. It hurts everybody when we're not equally represented, you know, in the legislative branch.
But also some of it's economics.
That too.
Some of it's economics.
Because when you reach a certain number of people of color in your districts, your housing, your property value decreases.
Really? Wow.
Yes. So that's some of the reason for redistricting, so that Caucasians can keep their property values up. Now, the very wealthy black people, they get included in having their property value raised. That's one of the differences also, is that very wealthy African Americans, right? They're more acceptable. We'll tolerate you because you're a millionaire. So, and we're going to take care of you because we're going to keep your property values up too. I think it has to do, some of it has to do with finances. I really do. And so I don't think all of it, when it comes to the redistricting, is about discrimination, even though the financial stuff is kind of discriminating. But, however, the wealthy want to be wealthier. They want to stay wealthy. And they will do whatever it takes to keep their property values up and to keep their money at a high value and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff included in this, you know? Yeah.
In the primary, well, for the mayor's election, I was a person that went to the polls to make sure discrimination didn't happen, and there wasn't a lot of voters. But I worked out of 2 churches where the people were coming in to vote, and it was set up so that I was an observer to make sure that nobody had to deal with a lot of hassling. We did lose one voter So there was no legal way we could get her to vote. Her husband got to vote, but she didn't get to vote. So I didn't have any power. I only had power to confront the issue with the judge and to try to get a resolution. So that's one thing you can be, is a poll watcher. So you get out in the polls and you help people do that. The other thing I point out is that, not to be political, but the election, the state election in 2020 is going to give us the representatives in the state capitol, and they draw those lines. So, I mean, some of the lines are just ridiculous, but they draw those lines. So if you want to make a change, you know, you need to talk to the people that are running and find out what their disposition is in that. And as she said, I mean, there was a lot of trying to have a black district or a Chinese district or a Hispanic district, so they didn't have to dilute the white districts. And so there's a huge amount of that kind of discussion that goes on. So I think if you really want to deal with this, you have to get involved a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit in the politics. Make sure that the people you vote for are going to help solve that problem. And I said I was a poll watcher, so I went in and you know, just being there probably made a difference. Not that I did anything, but I was there. So and I did it for Mayor Turner, that's who I represented during the mayoral elections. So there's a lot of little things you can do to promote better structures for folks.
I have a question about the poll watching. Is that something you have to sign up for?
Yeah.
And who do you talk to about this? We can give them.
I can give you names.
Okay.
There is a woman in Houston, she belongs to an organization that's doing exactly that. It's trying to make sure, primarily African Americans, but really would be anybody, trying to make sure that everybody has all the right information and there isn't this stuff.
Yeah.
I was going to use a bad word, but there's stuff that goes on that intimidates people. A lot of it's just intimidation. I was at one poll where they told this guy he couldn't vote, and he came in with his passport, U.S. passport.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, well, you can't, you know, that is illegal. That is legal.
Yeah.
But they're trying to talk him out of it. So sometimes it's just stuff like that. It's not that he didn't have a right to vote, but the person at the poll that was doing, you know, the checking in was not. Well, so what they do is that you get trained.
Mm-hmm.
It takes probably 30 minutes.
Okay.
And you can do it online.
Okay.
And you sign up, and then here locally, there's a person that helps coordinate. And so you pick sort of the polls that you want to do. And some people go from one to the other, so they make sure that the various voting places know that there's somebody there doing it. But when I voted on Wednesday, I think, there were both a Democrat and a Republican poll watcher there. So it wasn't just because it was the primary and they had both. But you can also represent, as I said, I represented Mayor Turner, and this time I'll represent this particular organization that's involved in doing that. So it's not very hard.
Okay, yeah, that's my question, because I think it's great to get involved. I know some of the things that people have a drive to get involved, right? But then they're not quite sure how to do it, and they get busy with things, and then they're like, oh wait, I forgot I was going to get involved, because life happens. You know, life gets in the way. So if we can't find, if you don't remember like the link to that website, we'll leave it in the comments of the Facebook Live video so that we can all go there. So we can all
I have a feeling this is for the city of Houston, and I know there are a lot of people here that don't live in the city of Houston, but maybe they'll know who could be in Galveston County or these other areas in Harris County. But I live in Houston, and so this organization does Houston. But it really is African American, but they're trying to make sure that it's really fair.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the name of the organization?
I have to look it up. I just know Yolanda sends me an email, and I do what she tells me to do.
Okay. I understand.
So call Yolanda.
You know, my impression is it's quite organized.
That's bad.
Right, I have the name of a woman who's in charge of poll watching.
Okay, what is her name?
Her name is, I'm looking it up, her name is Nicole Peterson. She came
Oh,
out.
yeah, Nicole, I know who you're talking
Nicole
about.
Peterson.
Mayor Turner's election.
Yeah, that's the first person that contacted me.
And so you just, I've got her.
Oh, good.
Okay, cool.
We'll put it in the comments and, yeah.
So, you can just call her, and you do have to be trained.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty simple. And the part I like about poll watching is you don't have to There's no confrontation of any kind. You're an observer.
Gotcha.
And so if you see something that you question, you can bring it to the judge's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if the judge doesn't suit you don't feel like the question is being answered, then you can call Nicole's office, and then she will do something, send the cop. I don't know, I've never had to call her. I only did it one time, and I didn't have any real problems.
Okay, awesome. And to reiterate, in case people couldn't quite hear that on Facebook Live, it is non-confrontational. You are just an observer, and if you do see something, then you can tell the judge. You don't have. There's very little confrontation, so you don't have to worry about
No confrontation.
No
You're
confrontation.
supposed to be invisible. You are just a mirror.
Okay.
And the judges that I worked with were very well trained, and so were the clerks. So it wasn't. We did have some problems, but they were solved. It's nice people solve problems.
And I've been an election judge, and that's where the real fun is. Because election judges are bipartisan.
That's right.
Nice.
And so, you get to decide, based on the information a person is presenting, if they can vote regularly or do provisional ballots. People have heard of that. Those are important. So even whenever you go and vote, and if there's an issue, and I'm like, well, you're not in the record, you tell them you want to cast a provisional ballot, and guess what? Most of the times they're counted. They're validated, and election judges go through training, and it's fun. I had a fun time doing it.
Okay.
She's expert judge.
I had another question related to what we were talking about earlier, with some of the stuff that you run into, you present your passport, you present some form of photo ID, and they turn it down. Would it be easier to get around that kind of stuff if you do early voting, or are you talking about that happens in early voting? Is there, because I know like if it's the last day of voting, like that's it, you don't get to try again. Can you try to get around that, and would you recommend going on early voting the first day you can vote to get around that, or would you still face the exact same thing and not be able to fix it?
Yeah, if there's an issue, there's going to be an issue, because by then, you should have your voter registration card. It kind of makes it a little bit easier if you carry that with you, because it's like, look, it says I'm supposed to vote here.
Mm.
But if there's, for some reason, you're not on the roll, all you do is present your Texas driver's license, most current one that shows your address, and they'll let you cast a provisional ballot. Passport, you can still do that because it has your address on it, but the main thing is that you say, I want to cast a provisional ballot. And a lot of times, there's some secondary and third levels of validation that are done, and your vote is counted. A lot of people think provisional, you won't count it. It's no, someone's going to go and reconcile you to the voter record.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
The other thing I've done is voter registration, so that people are registered to vote. And I did it up at Alameda Mall one Sunday afternoon. And I did it through the League of Women Voters, so it was nonpartisan. And what's interesting at Alameda Mall, because I ran around and asked people, are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? I don't know if you know anything about that community, but it's primarily, as you would say, people of color. They were mostly Latino and African Americans that were there. And it was the holidays, and everybody was in a really good mood. And the security there was excellent, too. So we had a really good time. But all the African Americans that I talked to were registered to vote. So I said, well, then vote. Well, yeah, we vote. So I think, promoting to vote, and it's a statistics I don't think we should be particularly proud of. This state with the worst voting record for women is Texas.
Wow.
So Texas women, it's not the worst state in the country for voting. I think we're like 42nd or something like that. But the women is the worst. So I always tell women, I said, we've got to show our muscle too. So I think there's a lot you can do in promoting voting and registration and fair voting.
And by the way, you know that you can, and we do it at Unity of Houston, you can have voter registration here. You can be declared a place that officially registers people to vote.
Registrar.
So you could do it here at the church.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wendy, were you signaling a question earlier?
No, I put down.
She's telling us, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Ryan,
so-
you had a question?
You had a question?
Oh, I just had a comment. I'm just really glad you talked about the voter registration.
Mhm.
And I think we can't overlook the aspect of voting and being registered to vote, of personal responsibility. I mean, we all have a responsibility, right?
Mhm.
And to register to vote is free. It's free, it's easy, and just like you said, the best thing to do is to walk in there with your registration card, your ID. Doesn't matter if you can't drive, a state ID is the easiest way to do it. Because there's personal responsibility in that, and I think we can't forget that. And, you know, you can go out there, we have all these, you know, politicians and people on the streets, you wanna go out and say, vote for me, vote for me.
Mhm.
We really need people saying, register to vote, because that's the key. I mean, I don't know about Galveston County and Harris County, it really couldn't be any easier. You can vote anywhere.
Mhm.
You can vote anywhere.
Now, lot of counties have that now.
So, I mean,
That is, a lot of people, when they see that ballot, they're like, holy cow.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's a lot of stuff on the ballot, everything.
Yeah.
So at least vote the people you know.
Mhm.
You don't have to read all those, some of them are silly.
Propositions.
Propositions.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
yeah, they are silly, I agree with you.
Some of them are really silly this time.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's one on there that's, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We should all have that, and, you know, it's like,
And both parties do that. so.
yeah, and it's like, you just,
The other thing-
but if you do, get out before you go.
The League of Women Voters, it's online, and also, so the League of Women Voters, it's gonna sound like I'm politicking here, but the League of Women Voters, I just got in the mail, but they have it online too, and they go through and tell everybody's position, and they're short. And that's what I did for the judges. I read what they said on the judges, so they're really short little paragraphs at the league. And not all politicians turn something into the league, so it was the judges I was trying to figure out, so there are resources out there.
To add a bit of context to voter roll purges, we hear a lot about it in the media, it is very politicized. Voter roll purges are actually done for non-political reasons. They are done to keep voter rolls fresh. When they work well, they purge people who have moved from the county or have passed away, so dead people can't vote. However, when done incorrectly, purges disenfranchise legitimate voters, and they coincidentally occur often close to an election, too close to fix the mistake. Purges target voters who haven't voted in an election in the past 6 years, which combined with a thing called felony disenfranchisement usually means if you have been a felon, you may not have been able to vote because you were in prison, but now you can't.
You can vote.
Some places, yeah. In some places, no. Another thing is. There was a huge analysis from the Brennan Center. Between 2016 and 2018, counties with a history of voter discrimination have continued purging peoples from the rolls at a much higher rate than other counties. This phenomenon began after a Supreme Court decision in 2013 in a ruling called Shelby County v. Holder, and the decision severely weakened the protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1960.
Especially in Texas.
Yeah, let's talk about that, like how that changed things in
The
Texas.
first thing I want to say, again, this is politics. Who you pick for your city and county person that's in charge of the voter rolls. And when they did this purge in Texas, Bennett, who was our legally represented person that had to handle that, she stood up to that and said, no, this isn't right. So who you elect, sometimes they seem like minor jobs, sometimes can be very powerful. And this was a good example of that. What was the other part of your question?
The other part was how has it affected Texas? Because one of the things is, it's in order to change things, we have to vote, and yet the people who would have the power to change these things are often purged from the voter rolls. So one of my questions would be, what are the specific positions we should pay attention to that can, like that lady who shut down that kind of crap, for lack of a better word. And when it comes to voter roll purges, a lot of people are being purged, but like, how do we restore those rights when the people who could vote in favor of those things are being purged? How can we work to fix voter roll purge problems?
Well, I think it's your county and city people that are in charge of the voter rolls.
Okay.
You have to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have two really good people now
Okay.
that are standing up to that. And they've done a really good job of not allowing that to happen. My husband and I went to a fundraiser for Benedict Harris, and she really had to fight that hard.
Mm-hmm.
And she's African American, incidentally, but she wasn't going to put up with any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to get people in positions of power.
Mhm.
I don't think as an individual you can do that. I don't know, you might disagree with me, but you just got to get the right people into power to make that happen. And we have done that in Harris and Houston.
Good. Okay. Do you have anything to add? Okay. Okay. Let's talk about Confederate statues. There are some people who say it's about heritage. There are others who say it's about hate. What are y'all's thoughts on Confederate statues, Confederate flags, those kind of things? In the past couple of years, there's been some debate about whether they should go down or whether they should stay up. What are y'all's thoughts?
You're going to be very shocked. I don't care.
Thank you.
I don't care. You want a statue up? Just pay me the same way, the right wage. Allow me to have a place to live where I want to live and not discriminate against me. Allow me to go to decent schools. Do you get where I'm going with this?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't care about any statues. You can have the statues up if that rocks your boat. Have the statues. I don't care. The Confederate flag doesn't faze me. It doesn't cause anything within me when I see it, because I've healed everything related to that. So it doesn't bother me anymore. I don't care. And there are many educated, sophisticated African Americans who do not care.
Yeah.
So I'm just being honest with you. There are still some that care, but we don't pay attention to those statues anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're part of our history. You gotta take your history, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yep.
History is history. I don't mind them, but let's teach them in their true context. Let's don't glorify them and worship them. Tell their history. And that's part of the issue we're having is people don't want to tell the ugly part of our history. You can't learn if you don't address the ugly. If you're going to repeat the same mistakes over and over. So put them in their context and just leave them where they are. I don't care. I never understood the thing about the Confederate flag anyway, but to each his own.
Obviously, I'm a minority. I found the Confederate flag obnoxious. It's used, from my side of the world, it's been used to intimidate. We're getting ready to do a census, and I don't want people intimidated by the census. We need a good census. If everybody runs around with a Confederate flag, maybe people might not sign up to be counted in the census. I don't have a problem so much with the statues, except that they were basically one-sided. And, if you go to the campuses or the names of the streets, or different parts of the city, there are basically honoring people that slaughtered black people and had slaves, and I don't think we should honor them. So I have a different point of view, and I really am impressed with these two ladies, because obviously they're not intimidated by anything, so I think that's wonderful. But it does irritate me, and I'd like to see, the great music and dance and writers. NASA sent me to Russia to work, and not that they're any better than we are, but they celebrate their writers and musicians. And they have statues in the middle of Moscow, in the middle of St. Petersburg, of Putin, of Pushkin, and the great writers. And, we don't even do that. And if we did that, I think we could really celebrate our American heritage in a much more interesting and useful way. So I guess I have a different opinion.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, to add some clarity to that, I think one of the reasons why I've heard people are against the Confederate statues is because there's a misconception that the statues went up during the Civil War when the Confederacy was active, but they went up long after the Civil War ended during the Jim Crow era. They were rushed up using kind of shoddy materials and things like that used to intimidate people in those areas. So that, to add context to that, that is part of the reason why there are some people who are against those statues, because they don't see it as heritage, because it didn't begin when they had that heritage, but they put them up afterwards.
But these two people aren't intimidated.
Yeah, they're not intimidated at all.
Am I supposed to be?
I don't know. I think it's you know, however you feel, you know? Okay.
The interesting thing is most African Americans are not intimidated or even care about those statues or the flag. They really don't. Yeah, and they ignore them. I mean, you know, most of the statues up there, unless they go up and read the name, they don't know who it is anyway. So, I don't know. You know, maybe we're making a big deal over something that isn't as significant as all African Americans having a right to vote. All African Americans have a right to a job that pays equal pay. All African Americans having an opportunity, having the right not to be discriminated against. And so to us, that's the significant thing. Keep your statues, make you happy, whatever. But, you know, we're talking about the real deal stuff. The stuff that makes it possible for you to take care of your family.
Right.
And keep your job. You know, put a roof over your head and so forth and so on. That's what is significant, of significant importance to African Americans. But the statues, I never hear any of my African American friends or acquaintances ever talk about those statues or that flag.
I really like that answer.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I've never heard from that perspective before. You know, I've just heard people don't like it. You know, and you got to be careful of that omnipresent they. You know, the big they that is used so often in the media to categorize groups of people in opinion polls. The big they don't like this. Who's they?
Yeah.
You know. So it's good to hear it from people who, you know, certain other people would say, well, they should be offended. You know. So thank you. Another question I have is about police brutality. How much do you think police brutality comes from racism versus abuse of power, and how do we know?
Whoa, okay. Yeah, okay, this is a subject. I believe that at this point, it's very hard to determine which is the highest as far as racism and abuse of power. What I've discovered, and bear with me, is that a lot of policemen are coming from Caucasians and other lighter races who are pretty much average Joes. And maybe in their personal lives don't have power and authority as they do when they put that uniform on and they carry that gun. So there is a great deal of that is about, you can say, abuse of power, or about having power. Because it's a lot easier than it used to be to become a police officer. Did you all know that?
I did not.
Okay. You knew that, right?
Yeah, can you give some context to that? Like, what do you mean it's a lot easier in what way?
You know, as far as, well, you probably know more specifics, right?
Well,
Because I know that, you know, education, things like that, it's not as high the standard as it used to be, but
So, in the past, in order to become a police officer, you had to go through a psych evaluation. They don't do that anymore. And you would also, not only would you have a psych evaluation, you would give references. And the questions they would ask your references were weed out questions. Because I had a friend, she was a reference for someone, and she said, yeah, they called me and they asked, well, do you think this person would be, you know, fit to be a police officer? She said, well, you know, she's had some issues. And they're like, They said, thank you for your honesty, but we don't want people that have, you know, possible anger issues or mental issues carrying a gun. That is no longer asked. They don't check your references. They don't do a psychological evaluation because that will come out what your tendencies are. And like you said, you know, the education is not there. You could be a high school grad, nothing wrong with that. You could be a high school graduate and, you know, there's some level of maturity you need to be a police officer. So what you have are these people who sometimes they don't fit in with society and they're carrying guns.
Yeah. Can I bring a slightly different perspective here?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay,
Let's bring the mic.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, we should
Yeah.
do that earlier, sorry, we need a mic runner. I'll be mic runner.
yeah.
Yeah, my oldest son, Bradley, from a child, he always wanted to protect and serve. And he went to A&M, and then he went to Houston Police Academy. Some of his friends are like, Bradley, you're above that, why are you doing that? But that was his thing. And he paid his dues as a street cop after he got out of police academy. Then he became an attorney, and he worked on the chief's legal staff for a good 10 years. And, you know, there is an extensive legal staff there to discipline misbehaving officers because, you know, not to excuse any misbehavior or violent behavior by anyone, but in a police force with 5,000 officers and all of them human, somebody's going to misbehave or abuse their authority. So for years, that was his thing, you know, to bring action against misbehaving officers. Also, he was active in writing taser policy. And, you know, tasers have saved a lot of lives. He told me that when HPD adopted tasers, their workman's comp costs fell 95%. I said, what was that? He said, well, you don't have to fight the suspect anymore. You just tase them, you know, if necessary. But he has recently been moved to head of training at the Houston Police Academy. And, you know, I raised him right. I have a great heritage. My parents were kind and friendly and treated everybody the same, and we're just good people, and we're friends to everybody, and my father especially, the kindest person I ever knew. And so, you know, to honor my parents, I raised my children the same way as best I could. And, you know, I did a couple ride-alongs with him back before HPD cut out the ride-along thing. And I saw him treat everybody with respect, dignity, friendliness, no matter, you know, what part of the community they were from, or, you know. So I'm very proud of Bradley. Of course, any abuse, misuse of power, violent acts by people not authorized to do that is one too many, you know. But I'm very proud of this man who is a role model for hundreds of young officers coming up. And I hope and pray that we have more people like him, men, women, you know, whatever ethnicity, first responders, police officers who are leaders, who will be role models. I mean, okay, this guy reads Biblical Archaeological Review for fun. No, I know. So maybe some people would find him even a little boring, but, you know, so I feel that there was a time, as we know, when HPD did not have, have a reputation for some really bad stuff. We remember Jose Campos Torres, who was found, floating in the bayou with his hands behind his handcuffed, and that's a terrible heritage to have. But fortunately, I believe that at least Houston police has become more and more professional. And, the more professional they get, the safer everybody is. And I'm very glad to see it. And I'm very happy to have people like my son Bradley Moorfield, Lieutenant Bradley Moorfield, as an integral part of this with the Houston Police.
Yeah, no, that's good. We could all use a few more Lieutenant Bradley Moorfields.
That's because you raised him right.
Yes.
On the basis of police, let's say not being vetted the way they were, this is the first time I'm hearing of it for like psychological evaluations. Why did that go away? Is that all over the United States? Is it?
It's in a lot of places.
Okay.
And because it's expensive. It costs money to do those psychological evaluations. So they had cutbacks, and that's one of the first things that had to go. But of course, that is what creates the window for their own psychological challenges to come out when they're in the midst of an encounter with the suspect. Because it can trigger something that suspect can do. It can be the slightest thing, can trigger your own stuff. And you will react based on this stuff that you're carrying and take it out on that person.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to add to that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about money. It's very expensive, and whenever there are cuts within any department or any company, the first thing they're going to cut is psych evaluations and training.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just good training, good quality training that's also missing, so that they know how to react properly, how to de-escalate a situation as opposed to escalating it, or things of that nature.
Okay. Do you have something to?
No.
Also, there's not as many people applying.
Not as many people applying.
There's very few people who are wanting to be officers. In the mid-'80s, there was a waiting list in Dallas and Houston to be police officers. There's no waiting list now. So there's a difference in amount of people that are willing to go and do the job because it is so difficult.
Okay.
It's not glamorous, they don't get paid much money, they have 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, driving
Right.
around any part of town on a Sunday morning, you're gonna see police officers out there directing traffic in front of churches just like ours, because they need the money, because they don't get paid very much. I mean, like you said, there's bad people out there, but really, what are they doing? They're here to keep us all safe, and it's a dangerous job. And when you've got Northwest Houston Deputy Dollywall getting gunned down right here in our own community, Sergeant Sullivan, who was run over in the middle of the night doing her job. There's a lot to that job. I mean, I get a little excited too. I study criminal justice, and so maybe I have my own bias about it. And I'm sorry, thanks. I understand both sides of it, but it's not a glamorous job, and it doesn't pay much. And I don't know what makes people do these things in the situations. I never became a police officer, but I just think there's a lot of sides to it, and it's not glamorous. And just like she was saying, I mean, you see advertisements for it all the time. They need police officers because it's dangerous. It's not a great job, and it's not paid very well, unfortunately. So, but I don't have a whole lot of real perspective other than it doesn't pay well and it's dangerous.
No, that's good. We appreciate that. Can we get another mic in circulation? And Warden has a question, or a question, comment.
Thank you, Morton.
I just want to speculate a little bit. I'm a former police officer, And I would think that one of the reasons why you don't have a lot of applicants is because they're so scrutinized. And it's a good way to end up going to jail yourself. I had to make some decision. Would I shoot or not shoot? And if I had shot, it is a good thing I could have gone to jail myself. Or do I stand there and get shot? You know, so it's just a lot going on. You know?
It's a great point.
Thank
I have
you.
something here.
Yeah, for your input.
There you go, Shannon.
I think it's not respected. The position itself, it has been something that you look at as been protect and serve, and this is a vast majority. It isn't selective. And what's happening now with everything that is being projected in the media is that it seems that police officers, which should not be a whole, but it has been viewed as a whole, are not protecting and serving equally. I would love for the tasing policy, as a Black woman with three children and 2 of them boys, to be exclusively effective. You can tase them all you want to, okay? Well, I don't bury them when you tase them.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it in a full capacity, yes, it is a dangerous job. It is. It is, but so is everyone. They're not necessarily lacking people joining the military, and that's also a dangerous job. That's not a list it's a little lower, but it's not as lacking. And so I think it's just been the lack of respect. We've lost that. And I grew up with a dad that was a cop. So I rode to school, on police vehicles, so that I have the utmost respect. But we've lost it, where now 50% is like, okay, am I getting a good cop? Or am I getting a bad one? Did you have a good day today? Are you upset because I happen to be Black? What is going to be the issue, when it comes to how you interact with them? Where I can have a friend who happens to be white and who's with me and a female and gets pulled over by a cop, she can ask him, why'd you pull me over? She can, why you pull me over? Well, ma'am, you were doing it going, I have places to go. You need to hurry up. And it's not a second thought to that cop that he is endangered, that he even feels threatened in any way. But if I do it, there is a completely different persona that any police officer would take on. I'm looked at as now causing a problem, but I'm asking the exact same question. Why did you pull me over? And it's a legitimate question. There shouldn't be, well, you shouldn't ask our officer that. Why? Because I happen to be a woman who's of color, but you do have those conversations with your children. I just think that the position has lost so much respect, and that part is sad in the country. Because they should be respected. They should be paid more as well because of the position that they're getting. And to find out that we cut in our very own police department funding for psych evaluations and training as well as their pay, that has shown that even in any type of government standpoint, that we as the citizens should not be respecting this position either, because we didn't respect it enough to pay them.
Yeah. Good point.
I believe that police officers should be making as much money as doctors and lawyers.
I do too.
And I think you would see, and school teachers too, you would see a completely different situation taking place with police officers. I truly believe that. I have believed that for a long time. Police officers and school teachers. Yeah, I really do. So that would solve the problem.
Amen.
Is it working? Yeah, this is a wonderful conversation. When I talked about working in Milwaukee in community, it was all African American, and the police ignored that community. There was no law enforcement whatsoever. There's also no trash collection. And so the city services for that community, and this has improved, I think, but I don't live in those communities. I was just shocked. In fact, one time I finally decided to wash out the garbage can, the big one that was outside. And I grew up in a rural area, and it was the first time in my life I'd seen maggots, and it was the inner city of Milwaukee. So the policing has been very different in different communities over the history. But one of the things I think is really good is that the white community has learned more about what the African American community is doing. And I talked to this man who was here during the civil rights movement, you know, the counters, and the different kinds of things to integrate the food service and so forth. And he always carried a gun as African American because he wanted to protect himself from the police.
Yeah.
And I had never heard that. So I think this kind of dialogue is real important because you can hear what different people's perspectives are with the same individuals. And now I think we're beginning, because of the media, beginning to get us, the minority here, we're getting to be better educated. So I think it also is incumbent upon us to all become better educated about this topic. Because I have to tell you, I've learned a lot in the last year or so, just talking to some of my friends about their history and what they've done. And these are people that lived in the Third Ward at the time when Third Ward was truly an African American community. And they had lots of issues.
I'd like to
Yeah, go ahead.
say something. I was going to say, one of the things that it occurs to me in the process is that we want to be very, very careful about generalizing our statements about whether it's about the culture, whether it's about groups of people, because I think that's one of the challenges and why we want to look at the history of individuals and help to raise up the awareness about those that are being presented in various ways, because we have a tendency to put a blanket generalization, whether it's about police officers, whether it's about this particular group of society. And the more we can start to individualize and look at, like we said, we have good examples and we have those that are bad examples in all cross sections of society. We've had a tendency, though, to have, especially in the African American society, to generalize and lump together, and I think, or we'll do that with police officers as an example. And I think we're hearing, even in here tonight, how important it is to acknowledge that the more we can help shine the light on the positive examples and bring those to light, because the media sensationalizes the negative, and there's also this speculation that generalizes, and as a result it creates that bias or continues to perpetuate the bias. And I would love to see us break, as ourselves, things we can do is our job to not use those kinds of generalizations in our thoughts and in our words and in our actions and ways of being in society, because the more we get specific to highlighting the positives in one another and in these aspects of society, the more we see that and bring that to bear, the more that becomes the normalized perspective on those groups of people. I also have a nephew who's a law officer in Lubbock, and again, he's a very, very amazing being. And I think that we can say that across the board. We can all say we know these people that are this, and we know those that have abused power, or that have carried out racism in their roles. So we know all those things are true, but what is it we're choosing to highlight and bring to bear, and what are we putting our energy and our thoughts into as we look at those things, and to notice the places where we have our own biases, where there may be a thought that comes through that, wow, where did that come from? That's a bias, and it's not okay. And to be recognizing that for ourselves. So I think these are really, really valuable conversations to move our consciousness and to be those that are advocates at many, many levels of action. So I really am just grateful for this conversation, and thank you all for bringing your perspectives and awareness, because I get to learn and hopefully become better at recognizing those hidden places in me that I may not even know, right? That I have any. I don't believe that I really carry a prejudiced bone in my body, and I never have, but at the same time, are there biases that I may not even be aware because of cultural things or different ways of perceiving? So I just think it's such a powerful and beautiful conversation. So I just wanted to acknowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about the media, and it's it's hard to ask this kind of question accurately because the media paints a broad brush across many groups of people. And they have a lot of power, they have a lot of reach, they have a lot of influence. What can we do as individual citizens? We can have the conversations. Can you think of some ways that we might be able to change how the media covers things, or make it less, the way they'll say, the police this or black people that? Is there something we can do as individuals to fight against that sensationalism?
I don't know, I kind of look at the fact, it seems that the media is, doing both sides. There's certain channels, okay? There's certain channels of news that will go to this side, and then there are other channels news that will go to this side. So here's the deal. You want a balance? Look at both. And make your comparisons. My TV stays on ABC a lot because I find a balance in ABC, and all the news on ABC seems to be very balanced. They tell you what's good and what's not so good. And I've learned that over the years because I'd stopped looking at the news. And someone said to me, when I became a licensed UNE teacher and was moving toward becoming a minister, they said, well, how do you get your prayer list? I said, oh. And I started looking at the news in order to find out what I am meant to pray for that day. But what I started noticing, that there were certain stations, certain channels that were biased in this way, and there were certain channels that were biased in this way. And I found that the most balanced channel was ABC. That's the one I look at. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, obviously I don't affect the national networks, but when I worked at NASA, I worked with the folks in the public affairs who did work with all of those major media outlets, as well as the YouTubes and podcasts and all kinds of different things. And unfortunately, there was a person that was African American that said to me, we need to change the culture at NASA and how we promote our NASA activities. And she pointed out to me that practically everything was white male. And it's not that those white male weren't great, because they were. And what they were doing as scientists and as astronauts were great. But she was saying we need to do a little bit less superficial and a little bit more in depth. And so as we worked with the Public Affairs Office in doing this, I had an opportunity to try to change the perceptions, because NASA is owned by the Americans and therefore should reflect America. And they have a hard time getting out of the white male thought process. And as I said, those men are wonderful people. They do great work. I would never want to say anything bad about them. So there was a real push to integrate the astronaut office. Now, NASA is a Southern organization, so it has a heritage that's not particularly, it's got a lot of issues it's had in the past. So we pushed and we got a lot of good responses, so we ended up with a black administrator, and of course he was very helpful in getting a lot of this change. So every time we put out a brochure, every time we put out a press release, every time we put out a video, we try to make sure it represented the whole NASA community. And that included Asians. We did a horrible job with Asians too. So if you look at a lot of NASA materials, you don't see a lot of Asians. You're more likely to see Puerto Ricans, and you're more likely to see African Americans than you are to see Asians. And it's, we all know that Asians make lots of contributions too. So in my little teeny weeny part of the world, and I think that's what we can do in all the things, is really promote all the people that we interact with, and we want to promote them, and we can promote them in a very visible way. That's my 2 cents.
The media. So with the media, you always have to realize, like I said, it's a curated viewpoint from a producer. The producer is shaping the viewpoint. So like you said, I look at both sides of the media. And whenever you read a story, you gotta go, be aware they're trying to get the news first. So you're like, okay, I've read this, let's see what it says in a couple of days. Because all of a sudden these facts come out, and that won't be on the front page, or they won't be talking about it. It'll be hidden somewhere. Like, oh, well, it really wasn't what we said. So you always have to be objective when you look at the news and ask questions. And sometimes you gotta do your own research. Because sometimes the story will be printed, you're like, that just doesn't make sense. And then you click on another link that's the original source of that story, and it's a whole different viewpoint. So I think we need to take that into consideration and just be mindful of what you're consuming. Because if all you're consuming is just one version, then you become that one version. And your vibe attracts your tribe. You'll start getting those type of people that validate that viewpoint. So you always just have to be balanced. And sometimes it's hard. You'll read a story and you'll get emotionally hooked in there. I can't believe that happened. Wait. Let's give this a couple of days, and we'll see the real story. So you just have to get that balance. You can't be afraid to see something that's opposite of what you may think is true.
Do your research on the channels, because they're different. They're very, very different. So, look for a week at NBC, CBS, ABC. Give each of them a week, and then look at it all, and then you decide. That's what I did. Since I have to receive my prayer list for the world, we gotta pray for everybody. So I wanted to receive my prayer list in a place that was balanced, where it was like, what I hear is they're giving me the news. Here's the news. It's not biased one way or the other. That's what so do your research, and you will find the one that works for you. As I said, I found ABC to be the balanced one. And I'm real critical, by the way.
That's good, okay.
Sounds like a real challenge.
Yeah, what about y'all? How are some of the ways that you guys stay centered with the media? So you use ABC. Helen, Renee, what do y'all do?
I watch PBS NewsHour because not only do you get what's going on here, it's also important to know what's going on around the world.
Absolutely.
And when I traveled overseas, it was always interesting to watch like BBC and see how they report on American news. And actually that's kind of balanced because I said, they're having a temper tantrum over there in America and they're trying to do that. It's kind of funny. So between BBC can be balanced, and I like it because, like I said, it shows it'll have like BBC America. They also have like half an hour where they do news out of Africa, news out of the Middle East. So you get that global view. And that's what will help us raise our viewpoint of things. You got to get the global view. There are a lot of things going on in America that we need to be concerned about. But in order to broaden your scope, look at what's going on in the world. Because some of these things, South Africa is a perfect example. They've done great things to heal race relations there. So my favorites are PBS, NPR, and BBC is what I look at. So I look at the other ones, but I just float around. I'm a news junkie.
Well, I look at those two, BBC and PBS. I look at those two, but I also get my prayer list real in the morning from ABC. But yeah, I do look at those because I want to know what's going on in the world too. I like knowing, and I like hearing them report our news, from their perspective. Yeah, so very different.
Very different.
Oh, yeah. I like BBC too. So, yeah. Another question I had was about the internet, discrimination and race relations. Do you think the internet has made discrimination, race relations, and all that stuff better overall, worse, some combination? What do you think could be better about it? Because to give some example, there's a lot of cyberbullying on the internet. There's a lot of racial discrimination and nastiness on the internet. And yet, to give an example of some of the goodness, there was a photo of an officer who's supposed to be protecting protesters at a rally, but somebody noticed in the picture he had a swastika tattoo on his arm. And so that came out on, I believe it was Instagram, and it led to him losing his job, obviously. So the internet is, it's new and it's largely unregulated. There's a lot of problems with it, obviously. Do you think it's been better for race relations, allowing people to see other people's perspectives from around the world, or do you think it's made things worse by creating potential echo chambers?
Well, first of all, I don't do a lot of dealing with what's going on in the world on the internet.
Okay.
I do it to connect with people and stuff like that.
Okay.
I do research through the internet, but I am not interested in participating in some of the bullying and things like that. I don't want to read it, so let me pass this on to somebody who... Not my thing.
You have nothing to say about the camera. Come on.
I'm trying to pass the buck. There clearly has been a lot of bullying on the internet, and it's been very toxic for a lot of people. And I think it's just like these folks said, I think you have to bring it to the attention that we need to stick with the positive, we need to stick with loving. I mean, the great people of the world have talked about loving your neighbor and caring and the kindness that we talked about, and that's what we have to promote. The horrible stuff that goes online, I mean, I just can't believe how bad some of that is. And for children, I think we just need to help protect them and help educate them and train. That's probably the worst effect of the internet, is how they learn racism or whatever-ism that is being promoted. So I think the children need to be better educated in how to protect them and how to teach them the right things to go on. At NASA, we use a lot of internet, Facebook, all that kind of stuff we use because that's where the communications is. And I had several different platforms that I could use with the high school students that I worked with, and they were wonderful. So it isn't all bad on the internet. They were doing great things, and they were sharing all their science accomplishments and engineering accomplishments, and they were, they also cared about, their hair color and their color of their clothes and all the different things that teenage girls, and mostly they were teenage girls, talk about. So it had all that stuff on it too. But, we talked about the positive of their academic accomplishments and where they were going and what they were doing with their talents and how they improved their talents. So you can use the internet, I think, in a very positive way, but clearly the bullying and the actual negativity and the junk, as you pointed out, it's on the internet. I have an example of that. It's not a racist example, but we had an astronaut that was up for a whole year. His name was Kelly, and it came back that his chromosomes, which is your genetic material, changed because he was exposed to that radiation over a year. And as it turned out, even National Geographic reported it. It was fake news. Somebody had just made it up and put it out there. So NASA had to come back and say that's not true. And so, he did have some chromosomal changes, but it went back to normal when he came back. So it didn't have any we don't think it had any long-term consequences. So fake news or misinterpreted news is, even when it's not meant to be racist or bullying,
can come back really bad. So you're right, you have to really be careful.
Internet, good and bad. You know, the bad are the trolls.
Mm-hmm.
The trolls, and I mean, you can say anything you want behind a keyboard.
Yeah.
But be a real person and say it to someone's face.
Yeah.
You can say anything. So there's good and bad. I mean, there's not, with kids, you just have to train them to give them context.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, they don't know. There have been kids that have been bullied into committing suicide, which is just horrible. It's just horrible. But, you know, you have to give them context. You have to have that communication with your children. And again, just like with adults, you gotta talk to them and tell them about, you know, things that are going on and put it into context and leave that channel of communication open with them so they don't fall prey to that, to someone who's living some weird fantasy. And, you know, like anything, like you said, the chromosomes, let's talk about the Burn Challenge. You know, they're like, oh, there was a gravitational wave that hit the earth and your broom can stand up by itself in the middle of the room. And I read it and I went, shouldn't that happen all the time? I wanted to see because I didn't know. And I'm like, wait a minute, let me check. And sure enough, if you just do a simple Google search on a lot of things, you'll find out the truth. I'm like, well, this can happen every day, big deal. But it was all over Facebook. So again, it's about maintaining that balance on the internet because you gotta stay out the forums, the comment sections.
Yeah.
There are sometimes I just read comment sections to be entertained. And I'm like, whoa, that's pretty funny. So you gotta have that context with it though. You can't go thinking, oh, these people are speaking the truth and I'm all riled up. You're like, wow, what a sad life you're living. And that's just the good and bad of the internet. I don't know if we can do anything to change it. That transparency with the internet, to be able to learn about anything is good, but anybody can put anything on the internet and anybody can edit a Wikipedia entry so it can say whatever you want it to say. It's not the encyclopedia.
Yeah, it's true.
I do want to say something in terms of racism, because racism and discrimination is promoted through various sites on the internet. So I think that really is true. And I think that the two answers to that are, first place, to stand up and say that's not true. And the other thing, get back to what Kara said, and we all know this, is when we get to know people as people, instead of this vast conspiracy out there, I think things change, and people come. I mean, there are people you're going to like, and people you're not going to like, and people you're going to love, and maybe you don't like so much. There's all of that variety of the human experience. So, getting to know lots of different kinds of folks that come from different backgrounds, whatever that is. And then when there's really this horrible racism, I think we have to speak up. And we have to say, this is not right. And do something about it verbally, at least let people know that it's not right, not just roll over and say, oh, well, that's just the internet. So I do think we do need to stand up.
Yeah, so with that, when you see people trolling on Twitter or Facebook, there's a mechanism you can report them.
True.
And you need to, because when you start getting into Twitter wars, it's just, come on. There's no winners. Yeah. Just report it. And, if Twitter or Facebook or, even LinkedIn, they don't take action on it, then you call out that platform.
Yeah.
You call out their CEO, you call out their CIO and saying, you're supposed to be giving us spaces where we can have engaging and uplifting dialogue or respectful dialogue. But when you have people being sexist or racist, you need to shut those accounts down. And that's very effective. And that's a good use of the internet. You got to speak up and you got to report it, but don't engage. Don't feed the trolls. Just don't feed the trolls.
Well, I'll tell you how I've dealt with, and I don't have, this hasn't happened on Facebook. I had to move to Facebook business. I have too many people. But I only had one negative situation happen on Facebook. Somebody, because I like to post positive, uplifting things, and somebody responded in a really, vicious, nasty thing, and I just told him, I love you, you're my brother. And if it's important for you to feel that way, then I honor your right to feel that way. And he disappeared, he never came back.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay. I've got two more questions before we open it up to audience Q&A. One of them is mass incarceration, a bit of a big, deep topic. So to give some clarity here, we in the United States have 2 million people in prison, which is more people in prison than China has, even though they have a much, much larger population. So even though you might think proportionally, as the population goes up, the prison population will go up too. That's not the case in America. We have a far greater prison population than, I want to say, most other places in the world, if not every other place in the world. Half of all federal charges that get people into prison are drug offenses. A quarter of all state charges are drug offenses. And yet, even though studies have shown that whites and blacks use drugs about the same amount, blacks are incarcerated 10 times, they're 10 times more likely to face incarceration for those drug offenses than white people.
Prison is big business. Okay? And you get less flack for filling prisons with African Americans than you do with filling them with Caucasians. It's big business. I'm just being real with you. And that's why there's so many African Americans on even smaller charges who are going, smaller drug charges, who are being herded into that. It's a business, and a lot of prisons now are privately owned.
That's right.
And they need to keep those prisons filled in order to make their money. It's not about the offenses. Don't fool yourself into thinking it is. It isn't. And everybody in the African American community knows that. We all know it. We know why there are so many African American males in prison. They're not going to get a lot of flack for putting African American males in prison. It's going to be accepted because they feel that the average person doesn't care if it's filled with African Americans.
Wow.
That's just the truth. And, we discuss all this in the African American community, but not everybody gets to hear it. And so I'm telling you what's the truth. So if you think that all these African Americans are being put into prison because they've committed so many offenses, no. And some of them are very small drug offenses, which ordinarily they would have been out. But now, anything that you do drug-wise, you're going in there because they need the money, they need to be filled so that the investors make their money back.
There's two things going on in Harris County. One is there is a drug court, and in that drug court, for those minor offenses, they can go to do service. And 1 year I was working with the Houston Food Bank. A lot of those people that were volunteers, they were forced to work at the Houston Food Bank, were actually had gone through drug court, and they had to do so much volunteer service. That was so they could hold down their jobs and take care of their families. Because you throw people in jail, they can't do those things. And so the effectiveness of drug courts, I think, have improved. I heard a talk just this week about that from a law professor from TSU. So they're working very hard to keep people out of jail. And she's right, there are private jails that make money, but Harris County only has so much money. And they actually have a fairly small budget for incarcerating people. So that's one way. The other way is a homeless court. People commit offenses because they're homeless. They steal, that mostly is just robbery. It's not good to rob people, but, and so the police have had to pick them up and throw them in jail, and these people think, oh, this is great, I'm in jail, because I'm at least getting three meals a day. But they're trying to then have them put into the various facilities that allow them to continue their education, or see their families, or actually get out and get a job. And so they're trying to not incarcerate them. So those are the two things that are going on in Harris County now. And with time, and it's a Republican and Democrat, it isn't just one particular group of people. I think the judges are really trying to push hard to keep people out of jail. And it's not solving the national problem or the federal problem, but it's getting at these quote-unquote minor offenses and giving people a chance. And it's usually young people that get into this. She's right, it's much easier to throw a black person in jail than it is somebody like me, although they probably throw me in jail too, but, you know, I mean, it's just, and it is a money making, but it isn't in Harris County, and they're losing money, so they're trying to, these things about trying to keep people in the community who have broken the law. The law is the law, you don't have to change the laws, but they have broken the law, but you want to keep them in their job, in their home, and do some kind of service instead of throwing them in jail. So it's increasing. There's more and more people that they're able to keep out of jail. So I think that's a really positive thing that's going on here in Harris County.
So yes, it's privatization of prisons. So the way the contracts are set up with the states is that if they don't have a certain amount of people incarcerated, they charge money back to the states. So the states don't want to pay them money, so they keep the prisons full. It's a vicious cycle. And then unfortunately, once you do your time and you come out, the state makes it difficult for you to stay out because you have to pay to be on parole. You don't have a job, but you're on parole. And if you try to get a job, there are so many restrictions that, like, there's a story of a man, he got a job, well-paying job. They're like, look, we need you to work tomorrow. But he's like, well, I'm on parole. I got to go back to report in to my parole officer. And the parole officer has to approve him getting this job. The guy's like, okay, parole officer just blew him off. So he lost an opportunity for a job making really good money because the system is set up for them to fail. Because, he's trying to make the money to pay the parole officer, but the parole officer has power over this person's life. They have to approve your jobs, and, you say, oh, I got to work 8 to 5. Nope, you got to be back here by 3. And what do? So we have lots of work to do with that as well. It's a vicious cycle. And so what happens is that person ends up back in the system. The state doesn't have to pay money to the private company running the prison. So we definitely need some work in that area.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you look at the various expenses in the for-profit prison industry, they nickel and dime them every step of the way, right? So if you're a female prisoner, you have to pay exorbitant prices for tampons and pads. You have to pay prices, very high prices by the minute to call your family. There's one prison which actually started making it impossible for people to see their families in person so that they could make more money off of the charged phone calls. And this is all while they're still trying to pay their legal fees that got them into prison in the first place. Then while they're in there, they work menial jobs. They don't prepare them for working outside the prison system, and they're paid in some cases 63 cents an hour. And other places, like in Texas, they're not paid at all. They're punished. They're put in solitary confinement, which is horrible for mental health. And then when they get out, if they've been in for longer than 6 years, they've lost their voting rights, and they have to get them restored. In some cases, in some states, it's very difficult to do that, and that takes years. There's two groups that come to mind specifically. There's the Geo Corporation and I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, it's the Correctional Corporation of America. In a single year, they made a combined profit of $2 billion from prison labor. And in a memo to their investors, they wrote that it is a great idea to invest in this because convicts have a habit of repeating their offenses, which essentially makes them into cash cows. So this is a huge business, and part of the thing that makes it all possible is there's this notion that the 13th Amendment made slavery illegal. That's not entirely true. It made it illegal except for punishment. So immediately after the 13th Amendment happened, places that didn't want blacks to be free, that didn't want to lose that labor, decided to find a workaround. And so they said, okay, slavery is illegal except for punishment for a crime, and they started charging crimes for every little thing, including drug offenses.
Amen. Wow. Wow, that's important.
Help the plantation owners.
Another thing, and I know we talked about this a couple of days ago, was the concept of microaggressions. Can you tell us a little bit about that, like what they are?
Microaggressions.
Yeah.
Yes, microaggressions. So microaggressions are comments that are things you say to a person that you may think is innocent, but actually considered discriminatory towards a person. So for instance, you may say, let me use Sheila. Oh, you're very pretty for someone with their skin tone.
It's pretty period.
Well, but someone will say that.
No, they will. Yeah.
Or your hair is so neat. Those are micro aggressions. You're not coming out and just saying, as a black person, hey, you're not bad looking. Just a little blunt, but that's just the way it hurt. That's just the way it is. Or you speak very well.
Yes.
For someone, you speak very well. Or another way is like, so why did you decide to become a mechanical engineer? Followed by, because I have a son and I can't get him to do anything worthwhile. That's a microaggression. Well, some people just say, oh, they're just asking why I wanted to be what I wanted to be, but actually there's some hidden biases and racism in that comment, and those are microaggressions. And a lot of times people just say, oh, your bias is showing. And that's what it is. It's a bias. Your bias is showing. And people get offended. It's like, well, no, they're not being mean to you. They're just, bringing awareness that some of the things you say that you think may be innocent are not so innocent. So those are what microaggressions are.
I have a good experience, a good example from my own experience. I worked for the U.S. Navy, and there was an African-American secretary there, and she truly was beautiful. Didn't matter what her race was. Anyway, we were both walking down. We both worked on the 7th floor. So we walked down the stairs instead of taking the elevator. I don't know why she was walking down the stairs, but I knew why I was, because it was faster. Anyway, I said to her, I said, you are just beautiful. And I was, 20, 21 years old. She screamed at me. She said, you just don't think black people, blah, 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 can be beautiful and all this stuff. She was really angry that I said that. And I think she could tell from the shock on my face that had nothing to do with this quote-unquote race, but it had to do with I really genuinely thought she was beautiful. and by the time we got down to the bottom, she calmed down a little bit, and I was totally perplexed because nobody had ever told me that. The other thing, and again I'm telling on myself, the other thing, and it truly was, the woman had braided her hair. What do you call that? It was the small braids. Micro braids, is that what you call it? Anyway, and so she had it done, and it really looked nice. So I asked her, and I've been told you never do this. But I didn't know that at the time. I asked her, how do you keep it clean? Because, you have to keep it braided. And she said, oh no, it's very easy to keep clean. And I realized that she considered that very offensive statement. So I don't know that we can fix any of this, but I think, for me, it was better to just somebody to confront me and say, why did you think I could be beautiful? Than to just pass it off. So I think a lot of times it's important. And where I worked when I first got out of my master's degree, the men there used to see this isn't racism, this is sexism, but they used to say, what is a young thing doing like you working here? What is a young girl like you doing working here? It was like, I wasn't smart enough to work there, and I was their peer. So there's a lot of little things, and I just cracked up laughing, and I thought, well,
maybe it's because I'm smart. so I think, I don't know that we can solve this, but I think if you feel that somebody is saying something that really insults you, like this woman when I was walking down the stairs, I think she educated me. She was really angry. She was so angry with me. But I learned a lesson from her being so angry with me. And maybe she learned a lesson too, because we were able to work together after that just fine.
And microaggressions are transcend boundaries of race and gender.
Yeah.
So it could be anywhere, anywhere.
Well, the one I get all the time is you speak so eloquently. Wow.
I hate to say it, but I get that too. So.
And it's, but mine always comes from Caucasians.
It's the delivery of it.
It's the delivery
It's the
of
delivery
it.
of it.
Yes. And here's the interesting. I was a school teacher, and if I didn't phrase my statements and my questions to her perfectly in alignment with her linguistic approval, she didn't answer me.
Oh my goodness.
Because my mother told me is that if you speak well, you'll be able to be anywhere and people will pay attention and respect you. And she was absolutely right.
Yes, awesome.
Because if you're an African American and you speak from the hood, you are instantly judged. And there's some kids in the hoods who are geniuses. But they are instantly judged. And my mother wanted me to be able to go anywhere and be anything that I wanted to be and do anything that I wanted to accomplish. So she insisted. And I'm not speaking this way just because I'm up here. I speak this way all the time.
She does.
It's true.
Because it was ingrained. And I will every now and then get down with my friends and, say something, but I can't even keep it up because I'm so accustomed to speaking this way. But the thing is, some people will say, wow, you speak so intelligently, and you hear for a black person.
Yes.
Because it's the way they phrase it, and they didn't say it, but that's what comes behind it. And I raised my children the same way, so that they could go anywhere and connect with any people, that they wouldn't be judged by their grammar and their diction. So I passed it on, but it is the, yeah. But I don't care.
Okay. That was the last question. We're going to open it up to audience Q&A. Do any of you guys have questions about anything that was said up here tonight? Anything that wasn't said up here tonight? Anything like that?
I do have a question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. 1 second. Yeah.
I'm taking in Kira's wonderful speech on how to stop the continuation of the thought, of the biases. And so I'm going to ask the panel, because especially when it comes to the interaction with our young black men, what is my new step? Because I've been preconditioned to prepare them in certain ways when they go out into the world because of the color of their skin, because of the stigmatization that will be looked at them, because that's the way that it's been, but we want to move forward. So for me, how do you breach that subject? I mean, being able to also make awareness, but keep it in a positive way, because it has to be awareness. They need to know that in a way, their life is a little in danger. That is a very harsh reality. But I would love to be able to steer them, and also not fearing and not being in a position where you have to be rigid and straightforward and thinking every second of every single thing that you're doing. And this is in every situation. This is not just speaking about with dealing with directly with the police. This is any situation of where they are. It's the same thing when they go into the store. It's the same thing when they go into the mall. It's the same thing when they're walking on the street. We mentioned the hoodie situation. So as a parent, going forward to stay positive, what is my next role in awareness, but still getting past the stigmatization so that we can move forward?
Great question.
Ooh, sister. You're gonna have to educate the people who are doing it. You're gonna have to continue to educate your children.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to continue to do that. What's important is to protect their lives and their dignity, okay? But what we're going to have to do is to find a way to begin to educate the other side.
Yeah. Okay.
And until we do that, protect your children, sweetie.
Yeah.
Trust me, that's more important. But there are many of us who are out there now attempting, and what he's doing tonight, what Reverend Cure is having here at this church, this is a part of educating.
Yeah.
This is phenomenal, and people are watching online. But number one is your child, okay? You keep doing whatever you have to do to educate them in order to keep them alive and keep them from being abused.
Yeah.
Then you work with others that you know, or Caucasians that you know well, and begin to have dialogue with them. Maybe form a group of interracials and start to have dialogue and start stuff in churches and things like that are happening just like this. But in the beginning, right now, take care of your babies.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's the most important thing. And then you begin to reach out to others and begin to talk to them. But you've got to take care of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had the conversation with my son years ago about the hoodie. And when you're having these conversations with your son, don't just tell them, don't do this.
Oh, yeah.
Tell them why.
Yeah.
Tell them why. For instance, when we first moved here about 15 years ago, my son, he loved to run around the store in Walmart. And I said, there was the Walmart on El Dorado. I said, I don't want you, you need to stay with me. And he said, why? Yeah. Why do you let me walk around? I said, here's the reason why. I said, a couple of weeks ago, someone did something very bad to a person. It was a sexual assault of a child in Walmart. And I'm like, because of that, I need you to be by me. Now, don't raise your children to live in fear.
Oh, yeah.
Don't raise them to be empowered and to be aware of what's going on. And that if they get into a situation, their objective is to get out. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever. Then you come back to me, I'll take care of that. So, unfortunately, this generation, the millennials, they're much more aware than we were. And they're already having those conversations. And they'll be the first one to speak up. That's not right. You can't talk to that person like that. And they'll stand up. They don't have any fear. So, you know, you just have to worry about the people that are fear-based. And, you know, when they are surrounded by a good group of people and they know you have their back and you will support them and that they're aware, that's how we're going to get to the next level. Because those guys are already having those conversations. You may not know it. They're already having those. I'm like, you talked about that? Yeah. And it's just casual, like, oh, I went to the store and blah, blah. They're having those conversations about race and the treatment of people. So they'll be fine. But you do your part to let them know how to handle themselves with people who are not aware.
I don't think I'm gonna add anything.
I have a question I want to ask about that, just because it's the thought running in my head is that, you know, I think, and I'm relating to, because I don't have this situation to understand from that perspective. right? I can understand what you're saying, but I don't have that in me. And I wonder if, like we teach a spiritual concept to someone, that we're living on this earth existence, but we still hold a spiritual awareness in the midst of it. And I agree that I think the first thing is protect the babies, is teach them what they need to know to be safe in the world at this point. And yet, where's the point where you also teach them both concepts? The idea that also be aware that we want to look at people individually and not just put that same kind of concept on a generalized group like we were talking about. So where do you teach them that? Because I know there's probably developmentally an age when they're ready to receive that versus at an earlier age where it's really just about protection, as well. It's just a question.
Well, my children and my grandchildren grew up in unity. So they had a leg up on it. And so they are getting their spiritual teachings and so forth, but they are being prepared for what they might encounter. And they're also being taught to step forward in life with love in their hearts and to be open to a higher possibility. But if what they encounter is the lower possibility, protect themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, the same. My son grew up in a more light church in Austin, which is a precursor to Unity, or it's basically Unity in a Presbyterian church. So that helps tremendously because it's natural.
Yeah.
You put them in those communities and they're surrounded by those people, but like you said, you teach them how to deal with the lower level people. So you expose them to as many positive and uplifting experiences as you can, stretch their limitations so that, they know how to conduct themselves everywhere. Take them to the opera, take them to the symphony, all the things my son hates. Take them to the museum. But it's like, we're going to go to the museum because you want them to know they have a place in this world, no matter what. Take them on trips. Grand Canyon, I took my son there. He said it's a hole in the ground. But I'm like, it's a big hole in the ground. But, it's like, I was a little insulted because I love the Grand Canyon, but, it's so that he knows that he can be out there in the world doing things just like everybody else. He has a place in this world. But if you happen to encounter, because you never know when, a lot of times you encounter the lower level people closer to home. But he knows how to deal with that. He knows what to do.
It's inspiring.
There's a mic. He gets the mic now.
You have a question?
Oh, well, people always say, I don't know how to put it, I'll just ramble for a bit, maybe you can figure out what I'm trying to say, but people always say, have the conversation. I mean, I've heard that 1,001 times. And I'm really having a hard time having the conversation. And I have a jump-off point. One of my dear, beloved friends, family member, just said this thing. She works with this woman. She said, she is so nice. She is just like a white woman. And I just blanched. And I'm like,
Right.
And she couldn't hear herself. She thought she was being complimentary. So there's the beginning of the conversation. And you said, say your prejudice, your whatever you're showing.
Say your bias.
Your biases are showing.
Yeah.
But I'm just so shocked when she was just as nice as a white woman. And
That's
I'm
what
like,
it means. What do you mean by that?
Exactly.
That's a good one.
You let me hear it.
That's a good one.
What do you mean?
or can they not be nice? I mean, that's, I need help. Usually I just stand there with my mouth open.
What makes you say that?
Right. What makes you say that?
What makes you say that?
What do you mean by that?
I think I did say that, but she just kind of repeated in a different way, repeated herself. And
Okay, here's one. So would you consider that biased? Would you say that about somebody your own skin color? You know, and do it that way. Like, you know, do you think that might be considered, you know, biased? I mean, do it gently and so forth, but ask the question, because if you don't know better, you can't do better.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's up to you when that's happening around you, then you teach her how to know better. And you could even tell her, you know, I know you don't mean any harm. Oh, that's a good one. I know you don't mean any harm, but that might be considered racist by someone of another color. Try that.
I think that's a good way to do it, is because when you come out with that with somebody, even though we all know we all have biases, when you first come at somebody like that, it's easy to take offense, because what it sounds like you're saying is you've done something bad, you're a bad person for seeing the world incorrectly, and you've told them in the same sense you're bad and you're wrong, which nobody likes to hear. So I think giving them the benefit of the doubt and asking, this is very important, open-ended questions instead of accusations. So don't say, you're this, say, do you see how maybe that could be biased?
Yeah.
I need to tattoo this in my
Well,
Give me some more. Give me some more.
do y'all have any, I think we can do one last round of comments before we wrap up. Do y'all have anything to add to that? Anything else you'd like to touch on?
Well, the only thing that I would like to say is, first of all, I am so grateful that this is taking place, that this conversation is taking place. Thank you for, and I'll speak for me, for giving me an opportunity to share with you my experiences and the experiences of my people in a welcoming and open way, where I can express some great challenges for us and things that we deal with pretty often, and to have you all hear us, to have you all be open and receptive to not just hearing us, but now having an understanding of how we feel. And perhaps that will carry you forward in a way that will have you open up others to hearing, to being compassionate and understanding of some of the things that minorities go through. And I just want to thank you. You touched my heart deeply tonight.
Okay, so yeah, conversations are important. And even though it may be difficult, you know, the first time you have to say, well, what do you mean? Or you have to ask someone the intent behind their comments. It gets easier, but the fact that you're noticing that is very important. I mean, it's not always going to be a perfect response, but it's just, you're opening up that dialogue. And I think this is a great start, open up the dialogue about conscious and unconscious biases, and then also the overt racism and some of the things we have to teach our children, because I'm sure a lot of you are going, well, I never thought to teach my kid that, or I never thought it could be perceived that way. So you gotta start somewhere. And even though it's awkward, make a joke of it sometimes and just move on. But we have to start having these dialogues in order to raise our awareness so that, you know, we can be unified, that we can actually realize the dream, that we're all seen as equal. no matter who we are or how we show up.
Yeah, it's been a real honor to be here, and I guess Kura and Kenny, I really want to thank you so much, and of course these beautiful ladies. Be self-conscious here. I think that, yeah, I think we just, you hear this all the time. I don't ever get a chance to talk to other kinds of people. You know, people have different experiences than I have, and we all need to open these dialogues. And of course, Unity has helped us do that, and Kira and all you have helped us. And to be able to have these very difficult conversations and learn from each other. And whenever I get into these situations, I was in one last night too, with this guy from TSU, and you know, we've got into a very deep conversation about how to work together, and this was specific goals, and even at NASA, how to deal with the issues that get into their little comfort zones. And so I think it's important for, at least for me, and I have to appreciate all the comments that were made here tonight, because it helps me be a better person and a more spiritual person. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. Reverend Sheila, Helen, Renee, thank you for your insights, for your wisdom, for your experiences. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
For your great questions, and for everybody that participated, both in Facebook live stream and those that will be watching it in the future, as well as then those of you that were here, because we know this is an important time for us to break down those barriers and those microaggressions and biases, and I'm really glad to be amongst those that are committed to doing that. So thank you all so much, and have a blessed night, and thank you all for coming out and doing this tonight. I'm so grateful.
You know, I go to the opera.
And thank you, Mary Helen, for doing the Facebook live stream. So grateful. There's a lot of good information. Oh my gosh, this was awesome.